Welcome to the Nobel Prize Museum here in Stockholm. My name is Gustav Källstrand and I'm here in this almost empty museum. You can actually see Greta over there. Otherwise it's empty in this exhibition called For the Benefit of Humankind. This is an exhibition that in the museum that celebrates the fact that the Nobel Prize is a symbol for humankind's ability to change the world and the way we live in the world in better ways. Because, of course, of scientific breakthroughs by Nobel laureates and that increase our knowledge but also help us find new ways to interact with the world and create new technologies and so on. And this kind of knowledge that science brings us is empowering. The more we know, the more we can do. Sometimes, like maybe right now, things can look dark. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and beyond that, the threat of climate change, the climate crisis, is always looming over us. But there is hope. A young generation all over the world is now calling out for people to listen to science when it comes to climate crisis, and the scientists are ready to speak out. And the Nobel Prize, as a symbol for science, we want to be a part of this, to bring society and science closer together in the climate crisis. So for that reason, together with the National Academy of Sciences and the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, the Nobel Foundation will next year, if it's possible to travel next year, we will hold a big meeting and summit in Washington, D.C., where scientists meet policymakers and activists to talk about these issues. But already today, we are starting the conversation, and we host this meeting between two people who are doing very much all they can to achieve the goal of putting science on the agenda. And let me just join the meeting here, because of course we do this meeting online. That's all meetings today. So Greta and Johan, can you hear me?
I can hear you. First of all, thank you for having me on and for organizing this. And yeah, I think Johan is back now.
Welcome.
Yes, hello Gustav, hello Greta. Sorry, I can hear you. I hope you can hear me.
Oh, good to have us with you. Then I will just also introduce you. Johan, you are professor of Earth System Science, and where are you right now?
Well, I'm actually sitting alone here at the Potsdam Institute on Telegrafenberg in my office. I've sneaked in here. We have a total home office lockdown, but it is possible to hide out here today for this dialogue.
Yeah, I can see the hand of a cameraman in the back, but it seems to be a good social distance between you, so it seems safe. We're very grateful that you took the time to be here with us from the Potsdam Institute. So, and I just asked Greta to start the conversation. I will now be in the background, so let you two to do the talking, and then I'll be back in a few minutes to see if we have any reactions from our audience and so on. So, please.
Yes, well, as we all know, we are right now in a very difficult time. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, and we can see how this tragedy is sweeping all over the world, taking and destroying countless of lives. And it is extra crucial that we act accordingly in response to this crisis. And we have seen so far that the response has been very, very strong. There has been very much political and I mean personal and individual will to change our everyday life. And I think more or less everyone has been affected by this, whether it's that they have had to change their everyday life or that it has had more devastating consequences. And this is the kind of reaction we see in a crisis, because we are right now in a global crisis, and that means that we have to put other things aside and focus on this at the moment for now, because that is what this situation requires from us. And because that is how you act in a crisis. In a crisis, you put your differences aside and you act. You go out in the unknown and take decisions that may not make much sense at the moment, but for the long run may be necessary for all our common well-being. And as in any crisis, it's always important, essential that we listen to the science and to the experts. But during crises like this, it is even more important that we listen to scientists, to science, and to the experts. That goes for all crises, whether it's the corona crisis or whether it's the climate crisis, which of course is still ongoing and is not slowing down, even in times like these. So, and today is Earth Day, and that reminds us that the climate and environmental emergency is still ongoing, and we need to tackle both the corona pandemic, this crisis, at the same time as we tackle the climate and environmental emergency, because we need to be able to tackle two crises at once. And yeah, we are right now in the year 2020, and 2020 we have known since 2017 that this is a crucial year, that at the latest 2020 the emission curve must have been bended steep downwards if we are to have a chance to stay below the 1.5 degrees of global average temperature rise. And so we are right now in this very crucial year, and the corona pandemic has turned, I think I'm safe to say it has turned everything upside down. So the question is then, how do we act from this, and how do we move on? What are the possible ways forward? And Johan, could you tell a bit more about the scientific perspective of this and how we can tackle this from a scientific perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Greta. And let me just start by kind of scientifically providing the full confirmation of your statement that, we have a devastating pandemic crisis in the world. We're also having a climate crisis, and the scientific evidence shows that these are interconnected and part of the same global planetary crisis that we're facing. So the scientific community, as you so well know, already half a year before the corona crisis declared a state of planetary emergency. And that declaration of planetary emergency is because of the exponential pressures of humanity on the planet, because of the risk of crossing irreversible changes in the Earth system that provides all our life support, both for human health and for planetary stability. In fact, it's over several years ago that in the very prestigious medical journal Lancet, that disciplines from medicine, neuroscience, climate science came together and declared that we now have to aim for planetary health. And planetary health is about recognizing that risks of, antibiotic resistance, infectious diseases from animals spill over a virus to humans through what we call zoonotic disease outbreaks, interacts with global warming and biodiversity, and that these are interconnected crises. That is exactly what we can expect. So, we should not cheat ourselves. The corona crisis was not a black swan. We were, predicting that this could happen because of the interconnected crisis we're in. So the conclusion is really that global warming and degrading of ecosystems increase the risk of pandemics. And this is laid out quite well in the scientific literature today, that, a rising globalized network of travel and trade combined with risky agriculture and food systems and wildlife handling, combined with deforestation and loss of biodiversity, leads to this cocktail of risk. So you're right, the corona crisis, together with the climate crisis and the ecosystem crisis, are tightly interconnected. I would even conclude to say that we're living beyond the carrying capacity of the planet, and we're thereby putting human health and nature's health into collision course and that the COVID-19, the corona crisis, is a manifestation of this fact. And it is several years ago, as you rightly referred, back in 2017, that we scientifically concluded that 2020 is the super year. This is the year that we need to bend the global curve of emission of greenhouse gases. It's the year when we have to start halting the loss of ecosystems and habitats for wildlife that threatens the risk of outbreaks of pandemics, and start to move along a trajectory that cuts emissions by half by 2030. I mean, that's a revolution pace of cutting emissions by half in 1 decade. Now, that super year does not disappear because of the COVID-19 crisis. So you're absolutely right. The recovery after this crisis must be a new direction for humanity. And the collective action we're seeing as we speak on people being able to rise in the face of this health crisis gives a lot of positive signals that we can also rise in the face of the climate crisis, but we should not cheat ourselves. They're there and they interact, and we need to rise very rapidly to address them collectively. But from a Fridays for Future perspective, are you planning in the days ahead now to try and instill more energy in the movement, or what's the feeling in the movement today?
Well, I think in the movement, we started thinking about like maybe we need to rethink this. I mean, I think it was throughout February, and it became more clear that, okay, this is it's very likely that this will come here, and we will most likely have to change our approach and our strategies. And then we quite early decided that we will cancel or postpone all big strikes and marches, because I mean we were in that kind of situation. It was the only right thing to do. During a crisis, you must put other things aside and do what is best for society in that moment and what is best for everyone. So that's what we did, and we have tried to find out new ways to still be activists and to still be pushing. So we have gone online, and we have tried to do lots of different local actions, like for instance, both climate related to spread awareness. Some local groups have been doing like smaller symbolic actions, but also local Fridays for Future groups have organized ways in which they can help their community to cope with this. For example, help people in risk groups. And I mean, that is, and of course, some people feel like, how long is this going to go on? And there's this kind of big uncertainty, and people are not always comfortable with that kind of uncertainty, and people want to know what will happen and how are we gonna move forward. And it might be hard for many to accept that we don't know anything what's gonna happen. We don't know how long this is gonna go on, because we can't predict that kinds of things. It feels like right now the world is totally different from how it was just a week ago. So we just have to adapt and see what happens, and change our behavior and plan from there. And because that is what you have to do in a crisis. You have to adapt to the current situation. But still, I feel like within the Fridays for Future movement, there's still this sort of big sense of resistance, and people are thinking, we will get out of this, and when we do, we will continue, and we will do everything we can that is possible in that situation to continue to push even harder. And I feel like many people have not lost their sense of hope, we have just changed the way we do things, and we're maybe just saving it for later at the moment.
But I think that's an incredibly important reflection, and I say that sometimes in discussions right now that, you know, the super year 2020 has not disappeared. It's pushed. It's on a little pause button, but it will return, and we will be rising in 2021 much stronger than before. And I think you're putting your finger on something incredibly important, that the corona crisis is so full of uncertainties. We cannot predict the outcomes. We don't have the data. Scientists are doing everything they can to provide the best possible projections, find the solutions. But isn't it quite extraordinary and so positive to see how humans, citizens across the world, are recognizing the uncertainty, and they apply different levels of precaution, that when we are not absolutely certain, you have to back off, and you have to be careful, and you have to reduce risk. And that's exactly what the climate crisis is about. We cannot know for certain that we can, you know, push the global warming up until 2 degrees Celsius, but there's a lot of scientific evidence to suggest that 2 degrees Celsius is very dangerous. You go past that point and we might irreversibly lose the Greenland ice sheet. We might irreversibly knock over even the ocean conveyor belt of energy, which could put us irreversibly into a future that you have pointed out so clearly, the Fridays for Future movement has pointed out so clearly, is too dangerous. It makes you too nervous. It's simply a crisis. So I hope that we will come out of the pandemic crisis with a much more humble recognition that, you know, the scientific evidence on climate shows that it's not worth taking the risk, and therefore we can act more collectively in the right direction. So I think there should be some, or there are some really important lessons coming out of this, the immediate panic and crisis we're in right now, that can connect to the panic and crisis that you have been the voice for such a long time now.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, do you think the way we sort of appreciate and listen and see science and scientific evidence has changed because of the corona pandemic? Do you think people are more open to actually taking in this information and this scientific data and listening to the experts?
Well, at least I can say with a high degree of certainty that it hasn't been reduced in any way. If it has moved in any direction, it has actually increased, because the corona crisis shows how dependent we are on science and experts and data, that we need the evidence. Then, of course, the corona crisis also puts into the open that there is some academic debates and there are different expert opinions, which is part of the scientific process. This is exactly how we advance science, that we collide with different pieces of evidence. But I feel quite reassured that science, in the heart and mind of people, has proven itself how incredibly valuable it is to have scientific assessments. And of course, when we talk about vaccines, we're talking about science. It's only the scientific processes and methods that can take us to that solution. And it's the same on the climate crisis. I mean, the climate science helps us understand the risks and the targets we need to take, that we need to bend the global curve of emissions this year and cut emissions by half over the next decade to have a chance to reach 1.5. That is science. But the science is also about finding the fuel cells, finding the solutions for scaling solar energy systems across the world. So it's about, the whole transition into, what you often, refer to as not only a safe future, but also a more attractive future. So I think science has kind of established itself even more firmly. But most importantly, the kind of dialogue that you and I are having right now, I think, as Gustav kicked us off, science is also feeling that we have a new role in society. And that has been growing for a long time, that we need to engage much more outside of the academic, the walls of the universities, so that we speak and talk and engage with the citizens and business leaders and policymakers to be able to navigate this very, very turbulent world we're facing and that we're in right now.
I just want to come in from we are monitoring the audience and so on, and with the point I think ties into that. First of all, there are many people watching and we have really a global audience with people in India, South Africa, the US, Philippines, so virtually all over the world. And it seems like, from what you're saying, it's quite clear that both the corona crisis and the climate crisis really maybe needs a more global response to these issues. Like you say, Greta, that the Fridays for Future movement has really gone digital and it works. But also that the response to the pandemic has been very sort of maybe on a more national scale as well. Is there a tendency for people in a crisis, maybe political leaders not least, to maybe narrow their focus when they're afraid and not to think globally? And I think this is something that we need to change.
Absolutely. During a crisis like this, there's of course a big risk that people try to use this emergency to push their own agenda, it could be, and to only focus on their own interests. And of course, we need to make sure that that doesn't happen. We need to, as citizens, global citizens, we need to demand that we need to take an international, we need to have a global response to this, which takes everyone into account. And unfortunately, we've been seeing these kinds of phenomena during the corona crisis, that countries have taken measures that may not be good for most people, and that we have to call out. We need to make sure that this is not acceptable. I think what the corona crisis shows clearly is that people are good. During a crisis, we come together and we act collectively, and local communities have started to work together, and of course we can see that in many countries as well, but also that sometimes there is a lack of political leadership, and when that political leadership is absent, then we as citizens need to go in and take that responsibility and demand that our leaders actually take that responsibility. And we in at least my part of the world, we are very fortunate to be living in democracies, and I cannot stress enough how important it is that we are active democratic citizens, that we make sure that a crisis like this doesn't slide in the wrong direction, and that I think really the corona crisis really shows that people on a local level come together and we show solidarity. We put our differences aside and we work together when we face a threat like this that is very direct and impacts us like this. We step up and together we face it.
Let me, just to complement what you're saying here, Greta, because it's so important what you're sharing. And let me just also put a challenge to this solidarity rising that you so rightly identified. So there is, not only is the climate crisis and the corona crisis interacting in terms of having the same root cause, they also have another very, very close similarity, because as you're aware, as more than most, the climate crisis is a global crisis. It is shared across the whole planet, and it's even so serious that your and my welfare, or if you live in Lagos or if you live in Beijing, we depend on the stability of the temperate forest, the rainforests, functioning oceans, stable ice sheets, irrespective of where they are on the planet. We call these the global commons, the commons that we all depend on for a stable climate system. Now, when you think of the corona crisis, it's exactly the same way. Just like carbon dioxide is spread across the whole planet, irrespective of where you drive your car or where your coal-fired power plant is, the coronavirus spreads across the whole planet, irrespective of where the source is. So just like you and I, or any citizen, depends on a stable Amazon rainforest, you and I depend on not having wildlife trafficking, wet markets that increase the risks of viral spillover from bats and rats and different primates, which is exactly the source of the kind of zoonotic virus disease outbreaks that we see are increasing in the world today. So we have no choice but to collectively act more as planetary stewards as well. So we cannot hide in our national politics or in our community. We need to, basically expect our political leaders to also provide, governance at the planetary level. This is incredibly challenging, as you know, with we have the United Nations, but look at just the discussions around the World Health Organizations right now, which is the kind of bodies that we all depend on, because you can knock the climate system over by destroying functions on different corners of the planet, just as you can destroy the global economy and the health of people if you don't, become responsible managers of local systems for health. And that's a commons challenge that we face now in this globalized world we're in. So I think that's why the youth movement is so important, because you are a global movement. You're connected with youth in different nations and different cultures and different geographies. And I think that is where we are today. We need to recognize that we live in this globalized world, and we need to act collectively locally, yes, of course, but also at the planetary scale.
Yeah.
So something that, Gustav.
I just had one question more about maybe difference between pandemics and climate change. Still, that in attitude, couldn't it be that a pandemic like this, people are able to accept short-term changes now because they believe that everything will then go back to normal, whereas climate change might be we have to find, as you're talking about, Johan, we have to find a new equilibrium or a new way to do this. What do you think about this sort of difference in climate, different in crisis responses?
No, but I think Greta has already kind of reflected quite a bit on this, that the pandemic, of course, is an immediate short-term threat, a threat to your own health and life, to your families, to your closest friends and relatives. Of course, people rise to that crisis immediately, and that one should recognize that, and that is, of course, a human, very, very important way of acting in a moment of crisis. The climate crisis is in that sense different, because it's a creeping crisis that hits abruptly with heat waves and droughts and floods and abrupt weather events already today. But of course, the real disaster points, we cannot see evidence of the climate crisis knocking over the whole world economy over the next days or months, or not even years. It would be something that is at risk for the coming generations. That is one of the big tasks for us humans, to recognize our intergenerational ethical responsibility to leave a planet for the next generation, which is, in a state that can provide good lives for everyone. And I would rather, so there is a difference, of course, but I would rather try to identify and recognize the similarities. And there is a similarity, which again, you have pointed out, Greta, which is that we can collectively rise. And not only are we collectively rising, this is it's not a week. It's like a marathon we're in right now. And I feel at least that there's more and more recognition that, you know, we will rise out of this, but we're not bouncing back to the old world. There is something new coming from the ashes of the corona crisis, because it is a long-term insight that is emerging, and that has a lot of similarities with the climate crisis. Because, just to close here, even though the impacts of the climate crisis may play out in decades, the action is immediate. When we talk about climate crisis, we say crisis because we need to bend the global curve of emissions now. We need to cut emissions by half now. Why? Because otherwise we press the on button of irreversible changes. So, you know, we determine things, in fact, actually, even for climate, on the short term. It's just that the impacts play out on a longer term.
Yeah, exactly. That is exactly how it is. And I mean, the climate crisis has never been treated as a crisis. It has not been communicated like a crisis, which is now. And why people are acting so much and changing their lives so much because of the corona is because this is an immediate threat, and that is how it has been communicated, and that is how it has been treated by media and world leaders, which is absolutely right. That is the way it has to be treated. But we also need to show that, as you said, that the climate crisis also impacts us. It is also an immediate threat, even if it may not be as immediate as the corona. It will still impact ourselves, and especially other people in other parts of the world, and is already doing that now. We need to tackle this now, otherwise it will sneak up on us, and like you said, these irreversible changes will become irreversible.
Yeah, let me just give you two examples of your point about immediate impact. So you may have, you know, we follow with some deep concern the food crisis in Southern Africa right now. And that is because of many years of drought. Science shows that is drought amplified by the global warming that we're causing from fossil fuel burning. We have the locust invasion, which also is very awkward because it's never been at that scale. And that could be related to regional weather pattern changes related to ocean heat exchange, which then also is amplified by global warming. This has caused deep food shortage in countries like Zimbabwe and Zambia and Tanzania. And now this is colliding with the corona crisis. So what happens is that there's a lack of food, there's a lack of health services, there's a lot of poverty, and then comes the virus, which makes it literally impossible for people to defend themselves. Because of course, you get desperate in looking for food in a situation where you need harmony, stability, and good health for social distancing. So that's one example. And the other most prominent example is, of course, that the coronavirus is a lung infection. It's a viral pneumonia, which of course means that the worse state your lungs are in, the more at risk you are. Now, if we go to the big mega cities in many developing countries, like in New Delhi, or you go to Mumbai, or you go to Lagos, we know that air pollution caused by fossil fuel burning is not only prematurely killing people in thousands every year, even without the corona crisis. We cannot exclude that this will interact now with a higher risk and frequency of deaths due to the corona crisis, because people have, on average, a worse lung status because of the air pollution caused by our fossil fuel burning. So you have, again, these interactions that are very immediate. The climate crisis may be long-term, but the impacts are immediate.
But if we think about this climate crisis and the actions we take now, is of course to stop the crisis and to stop the most immediate problems or the worst problems. But I guess it's also about building a new, as a new equilibrium, finding a new, more sustainable society. What are your thoughts on that, Greta?
Yes, I mean, we will have to start up the society again, our societies again, sometime very soon, and that is already being done in many parts of the world. So when we move out of this, when we open up the gates, or how you would put it, we need to decide which way we want to take, which path we want to take, and that it's we have to think long term and think about the consequences and the long term impact of these different paths. Like, for example, if we want a green stimulus plan, if we want to use this as an, I don't know if opportunity is the right word, but you get my point. To use this as a situation to move in the right direction, and because we are, whether we like it or not, the world has changed, and it looks completely different now than how it did a few months ago, and it will probably not look the same again. Because the world has changed, and we are gonna have to choose a new way forward. Sorry, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but I think one very interesting aspect in this corona pandemic, I mean, some things it changes the way things we touched in the beginning, that changes the way that we realize that we are actually depending on science and scientific evidence, and we need to listen to the experts and to the scientific data. And also it changes the way we perceive crises. I think that is a very big aspect. And also one very interesting thing that we see is that people, and we are now starting to see to compare individual human lives against the economy. We are starting to say, like, to make priorities, and I think that is an attitude that maybe will hopefully become more mainstream after this crisis, as that we are shown that that human lives actually are being lost right now, and we cannot put a price on a human life.
I think you're so right, Greta, and I also share with you fully that in the midst of this crisis, there are lessons to be learned that we can apply in a sustainable recovery after the crisis. And I must say that I'm actually positively surprised. I almost feel like there's a new wind blowing in the air, that in the midst of this health crisis, where we have to have all hands on deck to save lives and reduce health risks due to this pandemic, we still already now in society have a very open discussion, from policymakers to business leaders and civil society and citizens in general, that the cause behind this is largely because our economy is not able to provide us with the safety nets that we need. Everyone is talking about resilience, and the global economy we have is perfectly calibrated for efficiency and optimization. It is when things are stable, it delivers very well, but it doesn't provide us with any safety nets. It doesn't have any reserves. It has no, what we call, redundancy. There's no flexibility, there's no diversity, and there's no ability to recognize the need to both protect nature or protect the climate in order to have good living conditions, to reduce health risks. So I feel that there's a very mature open debate atmosphere right now to say, hey guys, we have underestimated the risk of these kind of shocks. And the only way to rise after this crisis is that we build more shock absorbers in the system. And that will require doing exactly what you flagged, that we are much better at handling many, many risks at the same time. And that this has to do with, food, it has to do with energy, it has to do with medicine, of course, and healthcare, but it has to do with the planet, basically. So I'm very, in that sense, quite optimistic, actually, that we will not bounce back to the old pre-corona world. I think we are turning a corner towards providing even more support for the Green Deal of the European Union, for the Green Deal in South Korea, for going beyond GDP in China, for a new deal in India. I think there is hopefully something positive that can come out. It's like, as Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis, and this is definitely a crisis.
But many people think that an argument you often hear, which I guess you don't agree with, is that one way to be resilient is to create more wealth, even if and creating more wealth is something that we do by using the planetary resources. But we don't have to worry so much about that if we just build a richer society, and a richer society will be able to deal with these crises. A richer society could deal with a pandemic or natural disaster better than so we don't have to worry so much about it in that way, which I guess goes against a little bit what you're saying now.
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, of course, there's a logic in that's the more rich and advanced a society is, the more it will be able to cope with a crisis. But I mean, it's not that simple. I think if it's one thing that the corona pandemic shows, is that our society as it is now is not sustainable. In any way, I mean, no matter how you want to define the word sustainable, if one single virus can destroy economies in a matter of weeks, then that shows that we are not thinking long term, and we are not taking these risks into account, and that we are not resilient, that we are not sustainable. And I think that's not an opinion to have. That's just, we can see that this is what it shows.
No, and there's quite a lot of empirical scientific evidence to support your statement there, Greta, that this old Kuznets, as it's called, the Kuznets assumption that the wealthier you are, the better placed you are to deal with environmental problems, is not correct, because we show very clearly that the wealthier you are, the more negative impacts you have on the planet, be it climate change or biodiversity loss. And because we're not building resilience, it means that our wealthy economy as we have built it is not fit for purpose, is not well designed to deal with when things go shaky. It's well designed when things are stable. And that is the problem, that our economy has been based on the assumption that we can exploit the planet for free, because the assumption is that the planet is infinite, that there's an infinite climate out there, infinite ocean, infinite soils and forests and natural resources. But now we're hitting the ceiling, and we realize, oh my God, we filled up the whole system, and it's starting to hit back. It's starting to send invoices back to the economy. That's why our old economic paradigm no longer works. I'm not against economic development, not even economic growth, but it has to now become zero carbon and circular within a safe operating space on Earth. So that's one point on this. But Gustav, you should be aware, which is, I find it quite extraordinary. So politically, for example, right as we speak, there are political leaders that say, look here, we cannot risk even further damage to the economy by keeping up climate action, for example, and costly policies for climate action. We better put a pause button on this and just return to the economy as quick as possible. What happens? Well, out steps the business leaders, out steps the CEO of the world's largest truck companies in the world, like Daimler and Volvo, and says, hey, oh no, we are staying on track. We see the competitive advantage of moving towards zero carbon transport system. We have already turned a corner, and we see jobs and economy and technology going hand in hand for a better economy in the future. So today, there's no contradiction between sustainability and the economy. On the contrary, one can argue today that if you want to risk the economy, you better invest in your coal mines, because that is, we saw what happens 2 days ago with negative oil prices. I mean, that is an indication, actually. So I would be very careful today to put an equal sign behind the dirty economy and the wealthy economy. It's actually increasingly shown that it's the other way around.
That's a hopeful answer. We talked early on about the importance of 2020 as a super year. And we have a question here from our YouTube channel from Melissa Vallaverde. She asks that do you think that the goals that's set for 2030 can be reached? Is there still a turning point where the Earth isn't a lost cause for future generations? And I guess that ties into sort of a question of, are we now, so we are at a sort of possible tipping point for things getting worse, but are we also at sort of a social tipping point where people are, where there's a real window of opportunity for us to make things better?
Can I just first say that these cut emissions in half by 2030, that sort of target being set up, it's being communicated very mainstream. It's based on an IPCC carbon budget, which gives us an approximate 50% chance of limiting the global average temperature rise to below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that, of course, at least I think that is not enough, since these budgets don't include essential aspects like many feedback loops and nonlinear tipping points, and also these figures are global and doesn't include the aspect of equity, and also, I mean, things like this. So we shouldn't just, as we said in the beginning, there is a big uncertainty. We can't just have a magic date or a magic number that this is when the world will end and this is where the irreversible changes are going to start. But so we have to be sort of careful with not saying that this is the target that we have to go for, because there are so many uncertainties and so many aspects that are not being included in, just so to make. Sorry.
No, as always, Greta, every time I have the privilege to interact with you, I get so impressed by your ability to act not only as the activist you are, but also as a very well-read scholar, knowing your numbers so well. And you're absolutely right. Cutting emissions by half by 2030 gives us, according to the IPCC, just a 50% chance of meeting the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. And not only that, it assumes no tipping points. And not only that, it assumes that we're able to avoid increases in all the other gases, in nitrous oxide, in methane, aerosols, and it even assumes that we will be able to keep roughly as today the carbon sinks in soils and forests. So it is quite a package of optimism, even in cutting emissions by half in 10 years, which is reducing emissions by 6-7% per year. Now, we don't know yet, but the estimates so far is that the corona crisis will, of course, lead to an unexpected reduction in emissions this year, because all the travel and a lot of industry has been temporarily shut down. And the estimates there are that we could potentially reduce emissions by 4% this year. Now, is that good or bad? My view on that is that it's neither good or bad, because it's, of course, not the solution. The solution for us to save a stable climate on the planet is, of course, not to shut down the whole world. On the contrary, we want to have a thriving, positive, and equitable future, which is also climate proof. But it tells us something about the magnitude of the challenge, because to cut emissions by half over the next 10 years is cutting every year even more than the reductions of greenhouse gas emissions that we're likely to see from the 2020 corona crisis. So just to show the magnitude of the challenge. But to your question here, Gustav, I do not think we'll be losing anything in terms of climate action from the corona crisis. I mean, there's a pause now in terms of all the engagements and all the policy meetings and all the Fridays for Future demonstrations and science meetings. We were supposed to have the first ever Nobel Prize Summit next week in Washington, hosted by the National Academy of Sciences. Our planet, our future, the first ever gathering of science and experts in civil society and business leaders on a manifestation for the turnaround. This will be now postponed until next year. But all that said, I don't see that we will be losing momentum. I think on the contrary, I think we'll be rising out of the corona crisis ready for even to take on the next crisis, so to say. And I don't think one should be too nervous about, let's say, losing some of everything that we had geared up for this year.
Yeah, exactly as you say. I mean, it's not, we cannot see that emissions are reducing during the corona pandemic is not a good thing. It's not, you cannot say this is optimistic or a good thing that comes out of this pandemic, because it's a pandemic, it's a tragedy. You cannot see it like that. It is a crisis, and as you say, I don't think either we will lose time. As you say, I think we will come back out of this crisis even stronger, even more motivated.
Yeah, I think that's we're getting closer to the end of our live conversation here. I just want to ask some of your final thoughts. By the way, I also want to show that this live broadcast clearly shows that it's possible to meet or to hear things globally. We have listeners or viewers from everywhere, from some in Sweden, some in Paraguay, Australia, United Kingdom, Sri Lanka, Hungary, or Ukraine, Norway. So people are really everywhere watching this. But as a final thought, final question from Victoria Arnold Webb, who lives in Dubai. She asks, I guess that's a very good final question. What's the best thing you would like to see individuals do for Earth and climate change? What do you think that individuals can do? Greta, what do you think?
Should I start?
Yeah, sure.
I think the number one thing, I mean, there are so many things that you can do, and as Johan, as you have said earlier, that you should not underestimate the power of one individual, and it's hard to choose, like, because there are so infinite things that we can do as individuals. But if I were to just choose a few, then I would first say to inform yourself, try to understand the crisis, because the more you understand, the more educated you are about the subject, the more, yeah, I mean, the more you will be able to take action in the right way. So that is a very important thing, and also to talk to others about it, to share the information, to spread the word, and create public opinion. Use your platforms, or talk to your friends or whoever it might be, and then also third, maybe most important, use your voice, become an activist, go out on the streets. Not now, but when the lockdown is over, we can still be activists online. We can still push governments and people in power, business people, policymakers. We can still push them from home, and we have to use our voice, because if we don't use our voice, then someone else will take that opportunity, and maybe we have to use our voice simply. And of course, there are many things you can do in your everyday life to reduce your carbon footprint, and that is also a very good thing you can do. But I think what we need right now is collective awareness, to spread awareness about the crisis that is going on.
And you yourself are, of course, an example of individuals can make a difference as activists. Johan, what are you saying?
I so much agree with you here, Greta. And every time I get this question, I also emphasize, keep your ear on the ground, try to follow the science, talk about this with your friend. That's the most important thing to do, to now be part of a knowledge movement in the world. And I think that message is more important than ever, because I would wish two things. I mean, one is that we never more talk about the climate crisis as an environmental crisis. It's not about the environment. It's about our lives. It's about good lives. It's about modernity. It's about the future societies we want. And secondly, to be courageous now and say, yes, the scientific evidence is clear. Health and sustainability are integrated and one part of the same story. This pandemic is not an isolated thing. It has to do with wildlife and ecosystems and forests and temperatures and water and climate. It's all interconnected. Please try and be a voice for that understanding that people and planet are not just two buzzwords. We're one integrated system, and that is the path to the future. And if we can together rise out of this corona crisis to say there's something better out there, and it's not one siloed agenda competing with another one. Oh no, it is a health, climate, biodiversity, economy, equity, future for humanity. I mean, it's science has shown time and time again that it's impossible to have good lives for 10 billion people unless we reconnect with the planet. Well, let's do it.
I think those are very inspiring words to end on, but I will just give our viewers one more thing that they can do. 1 second. Because many people might not be aware that Johan here has written a cookbook. So especially now that you're at home, you can, you need to stay at home, you need to cook from home. So please use Johan's cookbook. You can have recipes that are environmentally friendly. And if you're at home reading, you can of course also read Greta's book that called No One is Too Small to Make a Difference. You can get some hints for being an activist yourself. Sorry, you didn't know that I was going to bring up your books, but I really like the cookbooks. I wanted to give that tip. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real honor and a privilege to have you here with us. And thank you so much for everyone who's been watching this from all over the world. And I hope you keep this conversation going on the Nobel Prize social platforms. And of course, you can reach out to both Greta and Johan on Twitter or other social media as well. So thank you and have a good Earth Day and stay healthy. Bye.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Bye there.